Morning guys, so this morning I'm going to talk about something quite specific. A lot of you have asked me questions over the last few days about how my training's going, what I'm doing within my training at the moment, how I'm keeping up with my training towards my goals, etc. And I guess my stock answer has kind of been, well, I'm not. But obviously over time, over the coming weeks, as we start to understand a little bit more about what lockdown is going to look like, perhaps how long it might last, etc, etc, we may need to start to build goals that are a little bit more specific. And even at the moment, you shouldn't have no goals at all. So, I do have some simple goals at the moment each day or each week. It's just that they may not be race orientated. So what I'm going to talk about today is a way of goal setting that's a little bit different from what you might be used to and what you've used in the past. There will be some similarities, but it's something that we've been developing over the last 12 months or so. We took a bit of time to get it together, but hopefully you'll like it and some of you might find it useful. So a lot of you will be familiar with SMART goal setting, which is something that you'd have done probably over and over, whether it be within sport, let me just get a bit of pen, whether it be within sport or whether it be within the corporate world. SMART is an acronym we've used a lot to help set goals or help people set goals in the past. So SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant and time bound. So a lot of people get these two muddled up. A lot of people think, it's realistic. Well, achievable and realistic are actually the same thing, so it's relevant in SMART. And there are some other versions of this like SMARTer, etc, etc. But that's something that's been used quite a lot. And it does work really well. It's been around for a long time, but regardless of its effectiveness, at Passion Fit we always felt that it was a little bit lacking. There were some things missing. I was always a little bit unclear about why there was a T at the end, because specific, if a goal is specific, it kind of automatically becomes time bound. So I always felt that maybe the T was added just to make it smart rather than smart, because smart would sound a bit weird, wouldn't it? So anyway, I'm just going to talk you through what we use at Passion Fit and our guys use to help make sure their goals are likely to work and be effective for them. So we use another acronym, and we use an acronym called iterative. Now some of you may actually be familiar with the word iterative. So iterative is a form of assessment that's used to measure progression. But iterative assessment is a little bit different from normal assessment. So often in the assessment that we make is made against very specific like time goals, objective goals, or it might be made against our performance versus others. So in sport often we are measured based on our performance against others. In school we may be measured based on our performance against a set of parameters in an exam, or again potentially when you look at distribution curves, our performance against others. Iterative assessment is about measuring your progression based on your potential and your start point. So it's not based on anything else other than those two things. So what it does is it individualises the measurement of success a little bit more. So we talked a lot about accomplishment at Passion Fit, when you're looking at accomplishment measured around an individual's behaviours and mindset, an iterative way of assessing them works a lot better. It also means that if people are naturally less capable in a particular area, because let's say for example everybody has different levels of intelligence in different areas, people have different levels of physiological capability biologically, and measuring yourselves against others or against very specific objective measures can actually be quite demotivating. So measuring yourself in an iterative way and a more intuitive way like this can be a lot more motivating, and this is what we endeavour to do with all of the guys that are part of our coaching setup in the Passion Fit community. Okay, so what do the letters stand for in iterative goal setting? Well, the first one stands either for iterative itself or individualised. So any goal that you have should be individual to you. Now, what we mean by that obviously is we want to try to avoid having goals that may be too focused on other people. So we want to make sure that the goal is very individual to you at any given time. And this is incredibly important at the moment because you need to make sure that, because everybody's situation is going to be a little bit different at the moment. Obviously, there are some things that have been forced upon us, some conditions, but some people are working, some people are not, some people are working from home, some people are not, some people are working more, some people are not, etc., etc. Some people may have had long distance goals this year, some people may not have had them, some people may have had them taken away, some people may be still expecting those to go ahead. So your goals need to be individualised. You can't just have the same goals as everybody else. So whatever goals you've got, they need to be individualised to your circumstances. You know, for example, if you've got a big family and a complicated job, it might be unrealistic for you to set really stretching long distance Ironman triathlon goals. It may not be, but it might be more or less realistic than, say, somebody who's perhaps single and has a less high pressure job. So your goals need to be individualised by you. And one of the biggest demotivators can be when we try to set our goals based too much around other people and we don't individualise them enough. So this is really important. Okay, the next thing is they must be precise. But obviously there's going to be some crossover between this and SMART, because clearly SMART works. You know, we're not about to try and reinvent the wheel here. We're just trying to make the wheel a little bit more effective. So the goal needs to be precise. It can't be vague. So again, a little bit like SMART, it's specific. We must be very clear on what the goal is. Now, with iterative assessment, I guess that can be a little bit more difficult to do if you're using a bit more of an iterative approach. But precise is important. So you can actually measure progression. You can actually measure how you're doing against that goal. Now, even with something slightly more subjective, let's say like swim technique, you can still be precise about what you want to achieve. You might have this. You might say that you want to achieve a very specific drill and you want to execute it to perfection, and you're going to measure that via the assessment of a professional. You know, in a sport like, forgive me if I'm wrong here, but something like, say, karate, where you might be being assessed based on somebody's perception of your execution of a particular skill. You can still be precise about what it is that you're trying to achieve. Okay, so next, the goal must be suitable. So it must be suitable to your whole journey and to you. Again, not quite the same as individualised. So for example, at the moment this is really important because if you're not going to be racing let's say we're racing an Ironman in May or June and that's now been cancelled, setting training goals around doing 6-hour rides probably isn't that suitable at the moment. It would have been had you have been doing that race in May or June, but where you're not now doing it, those goals, those training goals, may not be as suitable as they once were. Okay, so the goal needs to be suitable for your circumstances and also the bigger picture, the wider journey. It needs to be attainable or aspirational. Oops. Lucky that they both start with the same letter, eh? So the reason I've included both of these is because some people prefer a slightly safer approach to setting goals, some people a slightly riskier approach, and neither are wrong. So my wife Lauren, who's behind the camera holding it, so if it's wobbling, I think her arms are actually getting quite tired now. Lauren prefers to set attainable goals that she's pretty confident that she can achieve, because she finds that quite motivating. So she prefers to set a goal that's less risky, a slightly safer goal, and overachieve it, whereas I tend to be somebody who's a bit more aspirational with their goals, set slightly riskier goals that I possibly don't always achieve. I find that motivates me a little bit more. Lauren finds attainable motivates her. So they might be very similar. They might only be at slightly either side of a specific measure, but they would need to be attainable or aspirational. What they don't want to be is delusional, and of course a lot of people do fall into that category. Delusional goals really aren't any help at all to either the coachee or the coach. Okay, they need to be trackable. So you need to be able to track your goal. It's important that there's a way of measuring. Again, going back to SMART, there's a way of measuring your progression. Yes, okay, we can have subjective measures, but we don't want those measures to be too vague and too wishy-washy, because if we can't track how we're doing, how can we see where we are on our progression curve? How do we know how we're getting on? And again, if we don't know how we're getting on, that can be quite demotivating. So it's important that they're trackable. They need to be influenceable. Oops. So what I mean by this is we must have influence over the goal itself, or the process that leads to the goal. There's no point choosing a goal that we don't have any control over at all. So, for example, there's no point setting the goal that you want to be out of lockdown in 2 weeks' time, because you have no control over that at all. In fact, it's tricky for some of you guys at the moment around your goals, like setting race goals. For example, I'm registered for Ironman Vichy. Having that as a goal doesn't feel that influenceable at the moment, because I really don't know what's going to happen. I don't have much control over whether that's likely to take place or not. So just the fact that the race might not be on makes my performance or process goals tricky to get right. So it needs to be influenceable. You mustn't set goals that you can't have any influence or control over at all. That's just silly, obviously. We want goals to be value adding. And this is one of the things that is definitely missing from SMART, as is influenceable, in fact. So, for example, Lance Armstrong had very SMART goals. A lot of military dictators have had very SMART goals, and they fall into this category really well. But if you think about Lance, you could argue, I guess Lance would argue differently, that Lance's goals weren't very value-adding. They weren't very value-adding to those around him, for sure. I suppose it depends on your measure of value. I guess military dictators would deem that their goals were value-adding because they added value to themselves. But your goals need to be value-adding. Ideally, they need to be value-adding to you and to the people that your goals affect. So getting balance right is very important, and we have to be very careful, particularly those of us that may be long-distance triathletes, that our determination and our desire to achieve a goal doesn't lead to a lack of value being added to those people around us, particularly our friends and our family, particularly our families who may be affected by the level of commitment that you have to show. And then finally, our goals need to be exciting. Oops. So if our goals aren't exciting, again, this is something that isn't included in SMART, if our goals aren't exciting, then it can be very difficult to stay motivated. Now, what I mean by that is that every part of the process may not necessarily be fun or inspiring. The reality is that most of us probably don't particularly enjoy going for 5 or 6 hour rides when the weather's not wonderful. But what we're excited by is what that's going to do for us. So the goal needs to be exciting, it needs to be motivating, it needs to keep us firing. So, guys, this is it. This is how we set our goals in Passion Fit. Now, what we don't do is we might get disturbed by the dog in a second. So what we don't do is we don't go through this process and try to find something that matches each. Okay. What we do is we set a goal and then we check that it meets these categories, and if it doesn't, we then go back and reassess the goal itself. Okay, so that's what we do. So that's how we use it. If you've got any questions about this process and you want to know a little bit more, then by all means drop us a message, put a comment below. But for some of you, hopefully this will help. I mean, I'm sure SMART has been more than adequate for a lot of you, but I think going forwards, and particularly at the moment, hopefully this could be of some value to all of you. So set a goal, check it against the list. Does it meet all the categories? If it doesn't, what do you need to do with that goal to try to get it to tick all those boxes? And then hopefully you should find that it's easier for you to set goals that you can stick to and that you stay motivated towards achieving. Okay, thanks guys, have a great day, and I'll speak to you all later.